Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RealClearPolitics Takeaway for Tuesday, July 20th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP.
I'm Cal Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief.
So, Carl, I just got done. I don't know if you watched it, but and I'm sure I wasn't the only one watching Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos go into space in his Blue Origin rocket and return safely. He was with a crew of 3, including his brother and the youngest. Now, I guess, astronaut, this Danish or Dutch teenager. And I guess it marks another moment, Carl. Space tourism is happening or will be happening in the very near future. What do you make of it?
Well, it was one small step for a billionaire, perhaps one large step for mankind. I mean,
happening on the anniversary of the day man first walked to the moon, right?
Yeah, you know, Miles O'Brien, who covered space for CNN, and he'd actually convinced CNN to send. He convinced NASA that they should send a journalist into space, and this is almost 20 years ago now, and he was realistically going to be the first person, and then the Columbia shuttle crashed, and he knew that they weren't going to be sending journalists into space, and that the shuttle program was probably going to be closed down. And he wrote a column about it, and he remembered how he sobbed when those astronauts were killed. And not for himself, but for the entire program. But he thinks that this is right, that billionaires doing it, they've picked up where NASA left off, and that this is a positive development, and that we always learn more for for pushing the boundaries of knowledge than we thought, and he's all in favor of it.
Well, it is the billionaire battle, and we saw Richard Branson do it a week or so ago. Jeff Bezos went apparently 13 miles further, and Elon Musk is the only one left, Carl. I'm sure he's going to be going up soon and going. Well, he might go all the way to Mars.
Well, he's ahead of the other guys. I mean, he's been sending payloads into space, so that's right. And this is a spirited competition. I think one thing Americans are looking at, though, and this was true in the space program in the '60s, Tom, and the early '70s. You know, people say, "Wait, we're spending all this money to send people to space, and we can't fix our problems here." And it's a perennial complaint. Miles O'Brien, who I mentioned a moment ago, says we ought to be able to do both. But these oligarchs who run these tech companies, this comes out on the morning, this space flight of Jeff Bezos on the morning that this consortium of newspapers, has this report out today, The Guardian, The Washington Post, I think 15 other news organizations, about how the iPhone is easily hacked and, by intelligence services. Is an Israeli company, but they sell it to all kinds of governments and nefarious groups. And your iPhone, all your data in it is not secure. So I think some Americans are saying, okay, you're spending all this money, you're going up into space, and that's great, but how about you fix the problem caused by your own products? Misinformation, spying, it's endless trolling and spam on our phones. Maybe that's a little closer to home. Maybe you ought to fix that since you caused it. I think some people are also asking that.
More terrestrial concerns. And we did see, Carl, we've seen the Biden administration sort of battle, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because you've covered the White House for a long time. So you had Jen Psaki at the White House podium last week saying that they were working to flag misinformation out of the Surgeon General's office. They had a team that was working to flag misinformation. They were going to work with Facebook to get these posts taken down or throttled or whatever they do. And that caused a whole lot of people to sort of sit up and take notice. Should the government, Carl, be involved in deciding what is considered misinformation and working with tech companies like Facebook and Twitter and others to try and stop the spread of misinformation or engage in censorship, if that's what, certainly what the critics call it? Is that a role for the government?
Well, it is censorship. We shouldn't shy away from that word. But this is a tough question. I, as you know, Tom, a First Amendment near absolutist, and I hate censorship, whether it's done by the government or private companies. I'm not one who thinks the First Amendment only applies to government. So I have a very expansive view of free expression. However, when you have people using this private platform, Facebook, a platform that makes billions of dollars for its owner, you have 65% of the anti-vaxxing stuff coming from 12 accounts, and that those people are profiting from it. And one of the lies that they're propagating is that more African Americans have died from the vaccine than the virus. I mean, that's misinformation. It's a lie, and it's dangerous. And you also, even as a First Amendment person, you think to yourself, should Facebook be allowing that stuff on its platform? Legitimate question. I don't think it's a question for Joe Biden in the White House, but it's certainly a question for Facebook.
We also saw, Carl, this morning a headline about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Twitter suspended her for, I think, 12 hours for quote-unquote COVID misinformation. She tweeted a couple things that apparently caught the eye of Twitter. You know, I'm like you, Carl. I'd rather err on the side of more speech than less speech, because you do end up with in a slippery slope situation, right? It's all about, well, who gets to decide, and what are those people's biases? Are there is there any sort of objective source for deciding what is misinformation, what's not misinformation? And we saw with the lab leak theory and the guidance on masks and the like, that what was considered misinformation, for political reasons, quite frankly, in the case of the lab leak theory 6 months ago, is now considered, perfectly legitimate, inquiries. And so it raises a lot of questions about who's doing the deciding.
Well, that's right. Well, and in this case, Tom, there's just a partisan aspect to it. So if you were just getting rid of accounts, suspending accounts that perpetrated misinformation about COVID, you would get rid of the Chinese government. Wouldn't be allowed. Nobody representing the Chinese government would be allowed on Twitter. These scientists who signed this phony report, and they were getting money from the labs, the World Health Organization, even Dr. Fauci, Tony Fauci, who I still defend and have done so on this podcast. But not everything he said turned out to, So not everything he said turned out to be true. And he and Francis Collins said, well, look, we were finding out more information. I accept that. But if you're going to, it's the problem with Twitter is that it always goes one side. It's always Republicans or conservatives who are being punished, not liberals. And that, I think, shows the danger of it. So that's just a partisan exercise. And that's how, well, not just a partisan exercise, but that's how a lot of people would see it because of the track record.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's an issue that's going to be ongoing moving forward, but we will leave it there for this morning. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics.
And I'm Cal Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, and this has been the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Tuesday, July 20th, 2021.